Buddhist monks, nuns, they were considered the happy ones. And I think the reason why they were considered the happy ones is because they had come to understand that theirs was not a responsibility to make life show up a certain way, but to actually embrace whatever was showing up.
Hello, and welcome to the Metta Hour podcast with Sharon Salzberg. I'm Lily Cushman. I produce this podcast, and today we're bringing you episode 243, continuing with the third episode of our Fireside Chat Series. And this series Sharon created as a way to have some intimate conversations with longtime Dharma teachers about their practice, the most impactful moments that they've had with their own teachers, some of the early days of their practice, moments they've had difficulty, and also significant teachings they've received, as well as their relationships with their teachers. So we're happy to be back with another episode. Today's guest is Tuere Sala. And I want to mention that this Fireside Chat Series is hosted by IMS Online, which is the Insight Meditation Society's online programming. And they've got all kinds of good stuff available there, so you can head over to dharma.org to check them out. Let me tell you a little bit about Tuere. She is a guiding teacher of the Seattle Insight Meditation Society and a founding teacher of the Capitol Hill Meditation Group. She is a retired prosecuting attorney who's practiced Vipassana for over 30 years. She's been teaching since 2010, and this is just a beautiful conversation. Tuere begins with a guided meditation and then shares her origin story with the Dharma, how she came to meditation, and really her approach of how to find steadiness without trying to fix things. She shares a lot about her work as a prosecutor and the ways that her work with people in that environment really set her up in an interesting way to support people, as she does now, with meditation practice. She goes on to share about the recent death of her son and the 3 years that she spent with him after receiving a cancer diagnosis, and the way we can kind of dance with suffering as poetry, not seeing death as a failure. She and Sharon talk a lot about sympathetic joy and the nature of gratitude to cultivate positive energy in others' lives. She also takes some questions from audience members about her Christian faith, her teaching of the 3 refuges, and Sharon asks this question that she's been asking a number of guests on this series, which is, did you ever have a big challenge with any particular teachings across your decades as a student of the Dharma? So this is a beautiful conversation. Before we get to the episode, a couple of quick announcements in the world of audio. If you haven't heard, Sharon has released a couple of new audiobooks this year, the first of which is the audiobook version for her latest book, Finding Your Way. And the hardcover version of this is an illustrated gift book. So the audiobook itself is that, and we've added a lot more bonus content. It is Sharon herself reading it, and there's all kinds of guided meditations, reflections, different exercises. So that one is very interactive. The other book that came out this year in audio format is her very first book, Loving Kindness. And so it was kind of surreal in a very short amount of time to record her most recent book and her very first book. And I know a lot of you here on the pod prefer to consume your Dharma and your teachings in audio format. So both of these are now available. If you head over to Sharon's website, you can find information for both of them. And that's SharonSalzberg.com. Okay, so let's get to today's episode. A fireside chat with Tuere Sala and Sharon Salzberg.
Thank you so much. I want to welcome everybody and say how excited I am about this evening and being with Tuere. As soon as I conceived of these events, calling them fireside chats, I thought of her. She was one of the very, very first people I thought, oh, I'd really like to talk to her because I haven't seen her in a while. I haven't been to Seattle, and there were so many things I wanted to talk to her about. And I was just so delighted that she said yes. And so here we are. And there are a couple of people I see, you're all dialing in from everywhere, which is always a great fun thing to see. And a couple of people from Ireland and England, where it is very late at night. So I'm especially, or very early in the morning, I'm especially honored that you are here. And thank you all for being here. So, Tuere, you're going to begin us off, I think, with a meditation practice.
I am, and I'm looking forward to it. I just want to say I'm very happy to be here with Sharon also. I was so thrilled when she asked me. I kept thinking to myself, man, it's been a long time since we've seen each other. And she used to come to Seattle Inside all the time. Almost every year you'd come.
Yeah.
Wow, things really have changed since COVID. And so I'm really happy that we have this time together. So let's take some time to just settle in together as a Sangha. We'll do a little bit of meditation, even though I do not have a bell. So Sharon, do you have a bell by any chance?
It won't be audible, so you can just say thank you or something.
Yeah, I'll think of some way to end our practice, together. All right, great. So let's just take a moment and notice where we are. Notice the room you're in. You could close your eyes and sense into it. Get a sense of the space it's taking up, the sounds that are in the room, just the felt sense of sitting in whatever posture you're in, feeling the furniture itself, whether you're lying down or sitting, and just feeling the posture, feeling the furniture, noticing the sounds, and noticing the space all around you. Something about taking a moment and just noticing the external conditions just as they are without having to make them any different. You might notice the changing nature of that external condition. Even if it's silence around you, there's a kind of an ebb and flow with silence. And in a way, we're all of us are noticing the external conditions in our space, and we're all hearing part of that, my voice. So there's a thread that's connecting us all together in my voice. And yet there's a distinction, a separateness, each one of us in our own space. And then gradually you could begin to notice your sensory experience internally. Maybe you just feel the weight of the body, its heaviness. Maybe you feel the body's breathing, just the rhythm of it. Belly expanding, chest rising, falling. Maybe you just feel tingling in the body, the aliveness of the body itself. But we can take a few minutes here, all together, all of us breathing, hearing, hearts beating at different paces, different sounds, different places, yet we're all together. You might notice the mind is thinking. That's part of this moment also. Just noticing that you're sitting or lying down. You're sharing in this space, in this Sangha. There's sounds, breathing, and mind may be thinking. There's no need to let go of the breathing, the sounds, and the posture just because the mind is thinking. Well, I think I'll end our time here with a little reflection from Ian McCrory's book entitled The moon appears when the water is still. And he offers up some Dharma reflections. This is one of my favorite. He says, two monks are walking on a long journey together. And at some point, one monk says to his companion, I really like walking alone. And the other monk responds, I like walking with you too. And this is really what our practice is all about. On one hand, we each of us walk alone on this path, and it unfolds for each of us in its own individual way. And yet, it's important that we walk together, and we don't do it by ourselves. We do it in Sangha. So when you're ready, you can open your eyes and kind of take in the Sangha. If you happen to have your video on gallery. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. That was really beautiful. Gosh.
Wow.
On to questions. Okay.
On to questions.
So I'm wondering if, to start with, you could talk about when you began meditation practice, what drew you to the Dharma to begin with, your initial motivation, if you can recall it. And it's hard because I know it's never just one thing, but.
Well, it was a big deal with me. I had a crisis of faith, actually. I had all this, I was raised Christian and was very much a strong spiritual person, did a lot of work in the church, and I raised my kids in the church. And I had this expectation that I would go to law school and get out of law school and go on and be a lawyer, make a lot of money. Everything was going to be great. And when I failed the bar the second time, I did eventually pass it. But when I failed the bar the second time, I had this crisis of faith. Like, I got bamboozled. It's not going to work. Everything's going to be bad. I mean, I grew up in a lot of trauma and a lot of poverty. And so I thought, it's always going to be bad. I'm always going to be poor. It's always going to be no good. And so I decided to go find a book, find something. It really was just a book. I was like a thinker, right? So I'm going to go find a book that can teach me how to be happy when things are messed up. I just assumed things were going to be messed up for me. So how can I be happy if things are messed up? Not how to get past the messed up, just how to be happy in the midst of it. And I stumbled upon Trungpa Rinpoche's mind training. It's his Cultivating Loving Kindness. It was his commentary on the Lojong practice, 59 slogans. And it did not make any sense to me when I first read that. I opened it up, went to Barnes & Noble, opened it up, and the first slogan I came to was, abandon all hope of fruition. And from a Christian perspective, that didn't make any sense, and I didn't see how that would tie into loving kindness. So I immediately thought, this is the book I want to read, because this is going to go down a different path that I've never seen. It's very different. And it actually helped me solidify my practice, because I would spend time sitting quietly, doing what I thought was meditation, sitting quietly and reading a slogan. And that's what I tried to do every day, live out of whatever he said in his commentary. And I did that 59 days. And then on the 60th day, I'd start again and did the same thing. 59 days, 60th day, start again. And I did that for many years, doing what I thought was practice. And then it was actually moving back home to Seattle and going to Seattle Insight. And I went to my first Insight meditation beginner's class. with Rodney Smith. And that was the thing that changed everything. Of course, I learned what real meditation was, and I had a nice little happy mind, and we had it worked out, me and the mind. But yeah, things began to change a little bit after that.
I love that. What year do you think you read that book? Was your first?
I think it probably was in so I would have been right out of law school. So it would have been in 1991, 91. I had heard about meditation, but never this kind of, not a spiritual path, not a practice that you would actually be on as a spiritual path and not just kind of like meditation as a way to be relaxed. So this was the first, and it was one of two books that changed my life.
May I ask what the other one was?
It was your book. It was Faith.
Oh,
So
yeah.
Faith came out. I was at Seattle Inside, and I was in the midst of a lot of anxiety, not really understanding how to get rid of that anxiety. That was my whole point. And not really understanding what had happened to my great meditation that I thought I was doing, sitting there, got my little slogan, sitting quietly, happy place. And then when I started actually embodying the practice, there was a lot of energy that had to pass through. And your book was the first time anyone ever talked about faith. Anyone ever talked about faith, what it was, that it was a part of the practice, that I really could have faith in and believe in what the teachings, things like that, teachers, the process itself. And that's, from someone that came from a world of faith, that was a game changer for me. Because then I could, in faith, it was sort of like the tagline there, this kind of, what did you say? Like,
trusting your own deepest experience.
Your own experience. That's
Yeah.
right. And that was the first time that I realized that I didn't have to copy someone else's practice, that I could actually start figuring out what was going to work for me. And it really changed everything.
That's so beautiful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Well, Trungpa Rinpoche's, maybe his first book in English, Meditation in Action, was one of the first books I read before I went to India. So it was really informative. And I'm really struck by you began that practice of the slogans and stuff before or just as you began actually practicing law. And I know you were a prosecutor. Was were you always a prosecutor, or did you practice other kinds of law?
No, I tried civil right after I finally passed the bar, but it was too uncivilized to me. And a job opened up in the prosecutor's office. And so I took it. And that was it. I was there for 25 years. I stayed in prosecution. And just it seemed more in alignment with who I was, my values, all of it. Because I really supported victims of crime. And that's what prosecutors do. We think of ourselves as representatives of the state and supporting victims of crime. And so it really worked well for me. And it was a lot of the reason why I had to steady myself in practice, because a lot of the things you see as a prosecutor is very, very emotionally challenging. You see everybody in their worst kind of position. Everybody's in this place where even the defendant, they've done something that they're having, everybody is seeing them in their worst state, and the victims you're seeing them in their worst state. And somehow or another, this criminal justice system doesn't really fix the difficulties of that. So you have to holding someone accountable, even though it's not really going to make it right.
Yeah.
And it's not going to make it better, and it's not going to Some people you're putting in jail that are way young, and they came from really messed up lives, but the crime is such that they're going to go to jail. And some people, that the crime disrupted their family so much that whatever you offer as even a punishment to the defendant is just not going to cut it. And so it's a very hard thing to hold, that responsibility. So the practice actually helps support me to do that.
When Joseph and I first started teaching in this country, it was just open retreats. Whoever showed up, would show up. And we hardly ever knew what people did outside of the retreat, really. And then as time went on and we got more specific invitations, the field that was the most eager to have meditation instruction was the law. I was really intrigued. We were teaching in law schools, we were teaching in law firms, or retreats for lawyers, and then people writing books about it, about mindfulness in the law. And I kept thinking, I don't understand why exactly,
It makes sense because law is very systematic. It's systematic. And you represent what makes for good law in the States is if you can represent your side and you stay your side. So the advocacy, if all things are equal and we're not talking about the playing of games and the drama that can go on, then the way our system is set up, you actually can uncover the truth. But the difficulty is that a lot of what you see, like me having to, sign arrest warrants or doing all kinds of search warrants in houses where there's kids and all the kinds of things that you actually had to do, because I worked in the drug unit. It's very difficult to hold that emotional energy without getting overwhelmed by what you're doing. And that is a perfect place for the Dharma to help you not get out of things or judge things, but to accept what you have to deal with in a way that's more equanimous. And so that it kind of helped open our hearts up a little bit and create a space where you could actually be a human being and do what's otherwise a very systematic kind of application. And that's the way I would think of it. Is most of the people I know that were lawyers, that's what they were looking for, was something that could open their heart up without it seemingly being mushy. That I think that's the part we were scared of. We didn't want to be mushy. We didn't want to be weak. We wanted to be powerful. We wanted to be open-hearted. So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
So now I'm really curious. Did you find, that's an extraordinary space where we can be with the complexity and the difficulty and the pain and somehow have enough spaciousness to take it all in, to have, as you said, equanimity, which is such a hard thing to understand anyway, what that means, but genuine equanimity, not indifference, and open-heartedness and presence with it all. So now I'm wondering, did that translate into being a teacher, like sitting with people and hearing their stories? And
yes, I think so. I think it's how I give Dhamma talks, things like that, all of that. Understanding, it's one thing if you have to actually go through something difficult, and the Dhamma has to be the thing that actually helps you get through it. Because if we could actually figure out our difficult lives, if we could figure it out and figure out what's the way to do it and make it work, we would do that. And it wouldn't matter what the Dhamma said. That would be our little side gig. But really, we would be relying on our own willpower. But when you are in a situation where you can't, your willpower is not going to cut it. It's not going to get you through. It's not going to help you. It's not, no amount of will It's like the times we're in right now. No amount of will or wishing or hoping things are different is going to make this current world feel better. So you need something that you can begin to find refuge in that steadies your sense of, I think, peace, calm, acceptance that isn't always fixing problems. And that's what I think the practice did for me. I learned how to find a level of steadiness without it being me fixing some problem. Because in law, you can't fix it. You can fix some things, but mostly you are just going through the system and you can't really make it work.
I wonder if you also, it's painful, of course, but sometimes people in their personal lives, because of a parent and some situation or because of their professional lives and the things they get exposed to, really have a different sense of what happens behind closed doors, in people's lives. And I keep thinking about this time this woman came to see me who'd had this terrible, horrible tragedy in her family, and maybe 6 months before. And when she came to talk to me, she said, my friends are getting a little impatient with me because they sort of feel like, hurry up, you've had 6 months, like get over it, And then she said, my friends all have golden lives. Nothing ever goes wrong for them. So now I am the symbol of life gone awry. And I make them very uncomfortable. And then I had this experience where I heard these words come out of my mouth. And what I heard come out of my mouth was, I think you need new friends. Yeah. And then I said, you should meet my friends. They're all at wreck. Which I apologize to all my friends, you're not all a wreck, but there's a certain level of pretense that is so strong in society. And sometimes we see behind closed doors.
Yes. That is something I do in my teaching all the time. I am not afraid to acknowledge the things that I saw over the course of my practice, of the errors of my ways, things I saw that were messy, didn't work, and the support that Dharma ultimately gave me, not the fixing, because sometimes I hear it like the Dharma's that's going to fix everything, but it doesn't really fix as much as it gives you the support to be able to be with whatever is going on. And I also think that's why sanghas are important, because if we think about it, when I was practicing by myself, if things got a little difficult in my sitting still, or if I didn't even understand something that Trungpa said in the book, I just figured it out on my own or just stopped sitting and went on about something else. But when you sit with Sangha, there's a way that you begin to sit beyond your own limitations, your own misunderstandings and misconceptions and misbeliefs. And it pushes you against it. In fact, I remember a teacher one time asked me, how would I know I was arrogant if someone didn't tell me? And I thought to myself, I wouldn't know. That's for sure. I would think I'm always right. I would never think I was arrogant unless someone actually told me I was. And so there's a way that sanghas help us mirror what's actually happening, and it normalizes the difficulties of practice so we can see it's a shared experience, not one, which is great. That's why I moved from law to teaching into this field so that I could just support people. So it's something special when you've come from anxiety, restlessness, and you've steadied yourself with it. And then you're sitting in a room with someone who also is feeling all this restlessness. They're at the retreat. They really want to leave. And there's a surety in your voice that says, this will pass. You don't need to make it pass. You need to be as kind as you can and stay with it. But this is the body, mind working out its own relationship. It's really not about you trying to fix your restlessness. And so that, I think in the long run, in practice, that's what supports us.
Mm-hmm. I was teaching here once at the Insight Meditation Society with Susan O'Brien, who was one of my colleagues. And Susan had begun her own meditation practice at IMS, maybe, I don't know, 15, 20 years before. And she was giving the talk that night. So I was just sitting there listening. And she said, in the context of the talk, she was talking about her very first retreat, which I was teaching. And she said, and I was so restless that I went in to see Sharon and I asked her, has anyone ever died of restlessness doing meditation practice? And she said, so of course, I was very interested. Like, what did I say 20 years before? So I asked, has anyone ever died of restlessness doing meditation practice? And she said, not from just one moment at a time of it. And I thought, that's a good answer.
That's right.
How did I know that 20 years ago? But,
That's right.
you know, everything you're saying is so wise and beautiful. And it's also reminding me of that. And it's reminding me of this story I told in a recent book I wrote about this chaplain, Kate Maestrop, I think that's how you pronounce her name, who's a chaplain like for the forestry service in Maine. And she was sitting with parents whose young child had been lost in the forest. The child was later found and was fine, but nobody knew that at the time. And the mom said something like, it's so nice of the department to send you here to keep us from freaking out. And she said, no, I'm here to be with you while you freak out.
That's right. That is exactly.
Yeah,
that's exactly.
It's just what you're describing.
Yes, that's what I try to help people see, is that if meditation is, and just your Dharma practice in general, if it's there to solve a problem, then that's all it becomes, is some solving of the problems. And you'll use it as long as it works to solve the problem. But at some point, it wouldn't be able to solve the problems, because not every problem is solvable. And so somehow you have to learn that the Dharma is something other than a problem solver. And that other than really is that's when it becomes freedom. You can access a freedom. And, when I really saw that is Thaddeus, when he died last year. I remember the whole process that we went through. For those of you that don't know, my youngest son got diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer right when the pandemic struck. And so they only gave him a couple of months to live. But he actually lived 3 years. And it's really because of his own will to live. And he was very young, 34, when he got diagnosed. And so the chemo had a better effect on him than I think when we're older. But over the course of those 3 years, because of my practice, I believe, I didn't get caught up in thinking about him dying as much as I thought about just us being together. I mean, if you think about it, he got diagnosed at the beginning of the pandemic in March, and everybody was at home. There was no work. Pretty much, if we did anything, we did it online retreats, but he and I were in the house all together all the time. I remember one day him saying, he was like, this is like a year into it. I went in to check in and see how he was doing, if he needed anything. And he said, he couldn't believe it. He goes, Mama, this pancreatic cancer is the best thing that could happen to you. I mean, think about it. I'm a 35-year-old man laying in the bed, playing video games, never working, and nobody comes in and says, when are you going to go get a job? You need to go get a job. Instead, everybody comes in and says, what can I get you? Do you need anything? He's like, this is like heaven. This is where you should be living. And over that course of that 3 years that we were together, it was very much not about whether he was going to die, because that was going to happen. You kind of knew that when you got the diagnosis. This was more about how were we going to live over the course of however long it was. And so we had a great time. I mean, up till even at the end, when he was bedridden, it was like we decided to watch the Marvel superhero movies. I don't know if you guys watch them, but we watched them in timeline order. So that's like 50 movies almost. And every time I would come home from a retreat, we would catch up on where we were in the timeline. And I think to this day, he stayed alive until we got to the last one, because he died about 2 weeks after that last movie. So there's just something about practice can help you be with the difficulty if you're not spinning around trying to fix it. Something about if it's all about fixing something that you don't like, then we're always stuck in the scramble to try to fix it. And practice had changed my understanding to just learning how to be with difficulty rather than trying to fix it. And that's sort of the way we were towards the end. It was really quite beautiful to spend that year. And most of the people I knew, I mean, his memorial was really, really huge and phenomenal. And it didn't matter how sort of sad I was in the morning. As soon as we got to the church and we got to the place, it all kind of came together and it felt so great. It was so beautiful. So that comes from this sense of not using the Dhamma to be a fixer and using it more as a means to help me get through whatever's showing up in life. It's okay. Kind of just steady yourself with it.
It's very beautiful. And thank you for talking about it. And it also reminds me of, they say that when the Buddha gave advice about how to be with somebody who was dying, and he said, remind them of the good that they've done.
Yep.
And be specific, like you were a great uncle. You took me to the park when I was 5 or whatever. And I always used to think that's weird, because wouldn't that make the person cling more to this life and therefore suffer more, which you would never want? But, people have asked me, like, what should I do? What should I say? And I say, well, this is what I understand the Buddha to have said. And every single time they come back and say it was the best thing.
It's the best thing.
It brought love into the room and the joy of having had the connection and being together. And
that's right. And it reinforces that you're not a failure because you're dying. Yeah. That is probably the hardest part, is somehow we think because we're dying that we did something wrong or we're somehow failing. And bringing in all that good quality gets that idea that you've somehow failed at life out of the room, because it's not really true. Who knows what's going to happen to us? And you're just kind of with it. So, Thaddeus's advice to me, when we had to tell the family that, things were changing and he was going towards the end. And he didn't, he said, well, we have to be careful, because they don't do suffering like we Buddhists do. This idea that the rest of the family didn't really understand suffering like we Buddhists do. And I said, well, how do we understand it? We Buddhists, I didn't even know we were Buddhist. But then he said that we do suffering like poetry. And that was, I think it was all those 3 years of being in the house during the pandemic. And he would hear teachings and he would listen to me, listen to Dhamma talks and hear and practice. And he would hear us talking about suffering, not as this thing to be gotten rid of, but as a thing to be embraced and a thing to be held in kindness and tenderness. And all of that is the way poetry is written. Even some of the most saddest, most difficult poems that we read, there's a beauty to it that helps us, that uplifts us, inspires us, even in difficult times. And that's what I think he took away. So when he died, there was all this beauty around him and care around him and all this loving kindness around him, which is very, very helpful in practice. And so I think that's what this practice is designed for. I think that's what Buddha was pointing to is the more Sangha you have and the more connection you have, it doesn't really matter what you're going through. We all go through this difficulty as humans anyway. So it's just part of the human existence, the human condition.
Well, it's true. We're conditioned to make suffering our enemy and death our enemy and change our enemy and anxiety our enemy and fear our enemy and, anything uncomfortable. And it takes a lot. Your son was an incredible human being. And
it was.
but that is the teaching. You're right. That to understand. And I was just talking to somebody today about how, in very early kind of mind-body interventions around cancer, it was very martial. Like you had the cancer cell and you had this image of maybe your white blood cell as a knight on horseback with a lance.
Right.
And you're going like Pierce, And it worked for some people, or it probably still works for some people. But I have other friends for whom it didn't work. And it was just antagonistic, and divisive. And it was much more helpful to have a sense of a healing in the deepest sense, whether you survive cancer or not. There's a kind of healing, of integrating everything into your fields of experience. Like this is a cell that is trying to be alive in a distorted and unfortunate way, maybe, but it is a part of life and it's holding everything. Like we started out talking, it's that embrace that really proved to be the most healing thing of all.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's what Dharma, I think sometimes the thing that gets me the most about Western practitioners is the degree of sadness and kind of misery we live in this practice as practitioners. I mean, I remember the first time I noticed it is every time you do a holdover retreat, so like the 2 months at Spirit Rock or the 3 months at IMS, the people who are happy are the people that are leaving and the people that are coming. But those of us that are in this holdover, we're kind of walking around all miserable and stuff. And I remember thinking to myself, what is wrong with this picture that we as practitioners have so much kind of weighted downness in the practice, when in Buddha's sense, Buddha's people, Buddha's monks, nuns, they were considered the happy ones. And I think the reason why they were considered the happy ones is because they had come to understand that theirs was not a responsibility to make life show up a certain way, but to actually embrace whatever was showing up in a way that kind of held them in the Dharma itself. And that it's not, that's how I think even in Thaddeus's last days, we were enjoying watching the movies and we were having all this fun. It was all this uplift and joy around the whole thing. So that's what I think practice is designed for. Really, if I could leave one thing here in this space that we have, I would want to leave that we in the West really enjoy a lot of privilege, a lot of actually benefit and good fortune. And by not sharing our good fortune with happiness, we are in effect preventing mudita from being in the world. We're preventing this kind of energy of possibility, uplift, inspiration. We can do it. We're preventing that from being in the world. Because if we were in a really bad way, I could see sometimes it's really hard when things are really heavy and you can't get out of it. You need someone else's upbeat energy You don't want them to come in the house and fall into the cave also. You want them to be on the outside of the cave saying, we can do it. We can do it. And somehow in that, we could uplift the whole world. But oftentimes in this Western practice, it's this wallowing in guilt and sort of disappointment and struggle and sadness. And instead of embracing some of the good fortune that we have and bringing out some of this mudita, I just think we could change the trajectory of the world if we shared more mudita in the world. Because I could see places where there's no mudita, and it makes sense. The kids have it, but even their mudita is getting a little hard to generate. So somebody has to generate it. And I think it should come from the West. That's what we have going for us. And if we could lift that up and have some joy around, I think the rest of the world's energy would shift instead of it being this takeover by negative, anger, aversive kind of fear-based energy. So that's my plug for mudita.
And just in case anybody doesn't know what the word means, it's in Pali language, which is the language of the original Buddhist text. It means, it's usually translated as sympathetic joy. Some people like appreciative joy. It means joy in the happiness of others. And a platform for that is really what Tuere is talking about, because if you feel you've got nothing yourself, nothing going, you feel that kind of impoverishment inside, you're not going to be able to generate any happiness for anybody else. It's just going to seem threatening, their happiness. But if you have a platform of some gratitude and some joy, actually experiencing joy yourself, allowing the joy, then you have created the conditions for then being able to have happiness for the happiness of others. And, it's interesting, gratitude as an example, because gratitude is a value or a quality that has a kind of bad reputation. People will often say, well, if you're practicing gratitude, you're just being grateful for crumbs that are coming your way in this unjust or unfair system instead of fighting for change, and you're being pacified and whatever. But when I was interviewing this researcher, David Steno from Northeastern, who writes a lot about qualities like gratitude, and I asked him about that, and he said, well, really, it's very different than that, because the studies show that when people practice gratitude, they feel some energy.
That's right.
And when you feel you got nothing going, you feel so depleted and fatigued and overcome. You can't seek change from that place. And he said, not only that, but people who practice gratitude want to pay it forward. They want to see other people get a break, or get ahead or have something going for them. And so they are more likely to try to affect change in a system. So it's very powerful just to look at these different qualities and really take a look for ourselves, not maybe what we've been taught to believe.
Yeah, that's right. And what that does is when you practice that gratitude and you start generating that internal energy of uplift and appreciation for what you have, you then create the conditions for someone else who is depleted to be able to share in your good fortune. And it creates this energetic shift of, that's what I was pointing to for the mudita, that we don't create our mudita, we generate gratitude, like you're pointing to, Sharon. And that gratitude for what we actually have as good fortune helps other people begin to share our joy, even if they don't have it. And what that does, when someone who is depleted shares in someone else's joy, it gives them the energy that they need to then go on and make changes. And it can be very, very, it can change the world. This is what I think happened in the civil rights. I mean, when I think about some of the music, even singing that song, the We Shall Overcome, for those of you that know anything about the civil rights movement, that became this really, really famous song. But the thing of it was that the more uplifted everybody got singing these gospel songs and singing this music, and the more uplifted they got, even if you were never going to get arrested, even if you were going to be way in the back of the march so that all the bad stuff was happening to everybody else, even if you were way in the back, your uplift gave encouragement for other people to withstand the difficulties they had to withstand. And that ability to withstand that difficulty without violence became the very thing that caused the whole system to begin to change. But just imagine if all of that energy was this sad, kind of dejected, we're not going to be able to make it energy, then the fear, the hatred, the oppression, and the discrimination that was happening would just grow and grow and grow and grow. But when it got hit with this onslaught of uplift and joy and positivity, then it changed everything. And so that's what I'm encouraging us as practitioners, because we practice in the Dharma, in this, in the Buddha's teachings, inherent in it is this loving kindness and this sense of happiness that's inherent. In fact, any kind of concentration is going to come from joy. And so all of our practice, the more joy we can generate, the more joy we'll experience, and just grows and grows and grows. Just the millions of practitioners in the West, if we all had that joy, yeah, we'd be in a different world right now. We'd be in a completely different world. There would be a phenomenal shift. But it's going to take that kind of reminding each other to bring that joy and have some gratitude for the good fortunes you have, and let people know about it and share about it and bring it, say it loudly, so that we can begin to shift the energy around. Yeah, good.
So I think the more one practices and learns and, thinks about these things, the more nuance you see and the more subtlety and deeper understanding. Because I think, like what Tuere is talking about and what this conversation is, it also makes me think of how, if you read some very classical translations of texts from the Buddha, you'll read about how we experience phenomena as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, whether we're hearing a sound or seeing an image or feeling a feeling in our body or having a thought or whatever. We tend to feel it as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And the kind of classic reactive states to that, if something is unpleasant, we push it away. If something is pleasant, we cling to it. And if something's neutral, we kind of space out or go to sleep. But there's a lot of nuance when you really look at your life deeply, because, we have very funny, not only do we have very funny and distorted relationships to pain and suffering, we have some very complex relationships to pleasure.
Yes.
And it's not always that we cling. I mean, we certainly cling, and hold on and all of that. But a lot of times we reject the pleasure. We can't let it in. We think we don't deserve it, or it's not good enough or whatever. And so those relationships really bring us tremendous suffering in all their various manifestations. And it's fascinating and important, I think, to look at all those different manifestations.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Because that you can question, you could actually begin to question if it's necessary for me to be as sort of pushing away the unpleasant, or is that just a habit? And is it possible that if I steadied myself with this unpleasant, would that in and of itself bring a level of pleasantness, like a little bit of uplift, that you can steady yourself even with something difficult? And I think it does. I think it brings this level of kind of joy that doesn't come from pleasant conditions. It comes from this ability to be free from the pushing of, pushing away unpleasantness or grasping after pleasant. We actually begin to feel a level of steadiness when we question whether we have to be sad or feel guilty or reject unpleasantness. There's a kind of a joy that gets built into our system when we, apply metta compassion to difficulties.
So there are a couple of questions that have come in for you, and I want to encourage everybody, if you have questions, to seek out that Q&A button. So the first question that came in is, were you able to hold on to your Christian faith as a meditation practitioner and teacher?
I don't know if you call it like Christian faith. It depends on how you qualify Christian faith. I don't attend church. I don't sort of practice Christianity in that way. I consider myself a Buddhist, and I definitely practice primarily in Buddhist teachings. But I haven't lost my sense of belief in God. I haven't lost my sense of connection to Christ. It's just that I blended in somehow in my own practice with it. So it's not so much as a Christian practitioner as much as it is I still I think when I get into deep concentration and awareness, I feel as though I'm in the presence of God. So that's the way the two would be blended in. So some of that, when you're raised in a faith, it's not always easy to just sort of let it go. It doesn't got to go away. But I would definitely say I'm more Buddhist and more, my understanding of what God is very different than it was when I was a practicing Christian.
Oh, I know, and we're going to announce later you have an upcoming retreat at IMS on the 3 refuges. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the 3 refuges and what they mean to you, like in this context of,
Yeah, it's very much a part of faith. For me, the 3 refuges they really have become the triple jewel. They really have become the shelter that I feel protected in. And so I'd say the refuges themselves are it's sort of like taking shelter in or seeking protection from the Buddha as a teacher, as a spiritual being who stepped out on the path and stayed with it until he was able to free his mind from all the torment that can happen with the mind. His teachings, what he saw, what he learned, you take refuge or shelter or protection in what he taught, and his directions or the path that he laid out that said, if you follow this path, this is how you can find your way. And you take refuge, shelter, or protection in a sangha, a group of practitioners that that we're all practicing together. And so to me, when I look over the course of my life in practice, that's what kept me on the path, all of that. I have a great deal of respect for Buddha because he set out to do this on his own. He went against his family. He went against his tradition. He went against a lot of things that would be part of his normal life. And it takes something to do that. And I know when I started practicing and started considering myself a Buddhist, I come from a very strong Black conservative Christian family. And the idea that I would be doing something like Buddhism from an Eastern tradition was unheard of. And so that I just had a lot of inspiration for his ability or his desire as a man to just follow his path and follow his sort of question and take this noble search up. And that's what I did. So for that, and then the teachings, I have bounced around, like Sharon was pointing some of the nuance you can read in the scriptures, the suttas, and some of the writings and the commentary, and just all of the ways that we learn about it from Dharma talks and meditating. I have always been able to take this questioning mind that I had, which led me to law, and actually question everything to see if it really was true. To question this ability to question without fear that there'd be some backlash for questioning. And so I could question and question and question and try everything out and see if it were true. And there's just no way I would have been able to go through what I had to go through to get to the place I am now if it hadn't have been for me being a part of a Sangha. So Seattle Insight was my Sangha, and I stayed with them for, it was, I'm a guiding teacher there now. So it's been like almost 25, almost 30 years I've been with them. And so that ability to stay with a Sangha and be with a Sangha is what kept me on the path. So, yeah, that's what I think. So me and Doral Williams and Devin Berry and Rachel Lewis, we were all in the kind of teacher training together. We are all going to talk about how the refuge is, what it means to us, and what we think this practice can bring if you really sort of find your way, find your own refuge in these three aspects of Dharma, or these three aspects of the practice.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So another question, why do you think Western practitioners have so much trouble accessing joy and uplift?
I think it's guilt. I think a lot of it, I hear a lot of it is almost guilt. So there's a dwelling on other people's problems. Instead of us being in compassion, a lot of times we're in sympathy and pity. So there's a lot of guilt for what I have when someone else doesn't have it. And I think there's a lot of sadness and heaviness for just how bad the world is, and the impossibility of us to fix it. And so I think it also comes from this kind of misunderstanding in the practice. So when you begin to practice and you start going on retreats and you start seeing your own mind and you start seeing how difficult it is, but you also begin to see some degree of liberation and freedom from it and some loosening of the grip of this mental tormenting that happens, you actually have access to more joy. But if you go and try to use practice as a tool to fix things, then you lose some of the, you miss out on what's actually possible. And so that's where I think a lot of the heaviness comes from, is this world that almost projects a sense of guilt if you have any joy. It's, in fact, many people are almost afraid to be happy in a world that's very, very sad. As if somehow or another, if I'm happy, I mean, truly happy, you're truly happy because something good happened to you, that somehow if I'm happy, then other people will look down upon me. And it's just, I think, a misunderstanding of what happiness is. It doesn't have to be that you are bragging about your goodness, but you're inspiring the rest of people who are around you to believe that there is possibility for happiness. And so that's why I think it's difficult for us, is because we're kind of ashamed and feel guilty when we have happiness and other people don't. And hopefully we can begin to turn that, sort of the way Sharon and I were talking about it, that you have gratitude for the good fortunes you have. And that gratitude, that appreciation actually can help support someone who does not have that, to have some energy that can help uplift them. That's what we're bringing. So we actually don't bring mudita, we bring gratitude and appreciation, and it gives others mudita because they begin to feel the joy of our good fortune, and that begins to give them joy, and they then can begin to generate it. So that's what I hope we one day begin to turn around.
So here's an interesting question. Is there a time that comes to mind in which practicing compassion was hard for you? Were you able to overcome that?
Yes. This is kind of a weird thing, but when I came from trauma, so a lot of my family, very different. We were regular Black family. And, but we had a lot of anger in my house, and most of my siblings and my father was an outward angry person like me, but most of my siblings were all very passive in their anger, passive aggressive. But I was very out, angry, big, yelling, cussing, whatever, big anger. And so when I started practicing, after a while, I was not so reactive, not so big. And the difficulty was having compassion for my family when I stopped being so outwardly aggressive, because I could begin to feel that everybody needed me to do the big anger thing so everybody else looked good. And when I stopped doing that, I could feel they're begging me to get angry, almost pleading with me to do that thing that you do so we can all settle down. Because if you're not angry, I'm still angry, but you used to take it away from me, and you used to express everybody's anger. Tuere would express it. And when I stopped, I realized that I was changing the rules of the game. And that was probably the hardest place of compassion, was to feel their suffering and have a level of kindness around it, recognizing what was happening here. I was changing the game. And there were times I would just say, I could just do a little yell, do some stuff just to settle the room down. I can cuss a couple of people out and settle the room down. But there would be this sense of, I should do something, because it's very, very tense and very difficult if I don't do my part. And so that was probably the hardest. But the other place that it was difficult was, even as a prosecutor, I would go into prisons and teach mindfulness and teach meditation and teach nonviolent communication. And there's something, if you don't go into prison and teach things, you don't really get this, but there's a place when men and women who never had access to any kind of self-help or any kind of settling energy practices, they're in prison, they're finally settled, and they come to this understanding that if I knew this when I was younger, I wouldn't have lived the life I lived. And there's a sadness that they can't quite kind of grapple with, and you're only there for a short period of time, and you wish you could stay with them and help them hold this, that you're not alone in this, that even people on the outside come to terms with things like this. But there is a sadness that they feel that's hard to express, that is this realization that your life could have been different and you're locked inside and you can't get out, even though you know now a better way to live. And that's a very hard kind of place to be. And the only way you can hold that is with compassion. You can't try to fix it. You can't try to placate it or smooth it over. You just have to be solid in the sense of be grateful that you know this now. Because whether you're in prison or not in prison, you can still be kind for the rest of your life. That it's not where you're at that determines, how your life is going to unfold. And so being able to say that to someone who's in prison and you're about to leave, and they have this realization that they have to go now, lay in their bed and try to grapple with, is a very difficult thing to do. But I've faced it many times, watching men and women come to terms with this recognition of, I understand this. If I had known this, I would have been different. And that's a hard place to be. So those, I think, would be the two times I had the most difficulty with compassion.
What does your practice look like today? Do you sit daily?
I do. I sit daily. It is much more, I'd say, intellectual than it used to be. It used to be very ritualistic. So I used to do a lot of ritual to settle myself and then practice. And now I do more reading some sutta piece, some part of the sutta, and then I'll just sit there and contemplate what it means. And so there's a much more, it seems very studious. It's more than it used to be. And I do practice, though, I do hold space in December for the month to practice. And there's something about practicing in a month when you're by yourself and you're settled and you have the space to just be with the practice, listening to Dharma talks, listening to morning instructions from other teachers, things like that I really enjoy. So that's pretty much how I practice. And then, of course, I'm always on retreat somewhere. So I'm always in space with someone else. Practicing alongside everybody else, that's very beautiful to me.
It's really true.
Yeah, you do get it's a different kind of practice when you are both holding space and in meditation at the same time. It's very something about being in the room with other practitioners, retreatants, and we're all doing it together. It's very special.
That's really true. I was once recording some guided meditations for an app, and they told me I wasn't allowed to have long periods of unexplained silence, because usually, when you give instruction, you say, feel your breath. And if you wish, you can use a mental, whatever, you leave space for them to actually do the thing you just suggested. And they said, you can't do that on an app because people will think the app is broken.
Oh, that's right.
Because you're not saying anything. So what you have to say is, now you do that. And I said, no, you don't understand. I am doing it myself. And for me to have to say every 2 minutes, now you do that, is going to break up my own meditation. It's not going to work that way. And we had a big disagreement, but we finally compromised. I said, in the beginning, when I'm setting the stage, like, you can sit comfortably, close your eyes or not. How about if I say, and when I become silent, that's the signal for you to put into practice what I've just suggested. And that was a good compromise. But
that's a good thing. But that's it. You do begin to practice. Retreats become your practice also. They become your retreats also. So you're practicing a lot in community. It's really, really, really nice.
Another question, do you have a favorite type of meditation?
I do 9 bodies. That's my favorite practice. I've been doing it with Philip since his book came out.
That's Philip Moffitt, by the way.
Philip Moffitt. Yeah, when his book came out, and I practice. I've been a Thai forest practitioner for a long time. Ajahn Chah, Ajahn Mun. These are all monastics or long since dead, but really strong teachers in the lineage that I practice in, and Ajahn Sumedho. And so that practice of Thai forest, Philip Moffitt is a Thai forest teacher, and in that he wove in 9 bodies, something to focus your attention on, and these different dimensions of consciousness. And so that's how I practice mostly, is finding my way into the more subtler layers of consciousness, and then sitting and resting there.
So the Thai forest tradition, again, for people who may not be that familiar with it, is characterized, well, first by a great sense of humor, but also there's often a kind of naturalness to the practice. Like the Burmese schools where I practiced tend to be very systematic and very, very structured. So a very classical Burmese style of doing walking meditation would be in 3 speeds. You start off, you're just walking back and forth. You're not like taking a walk, but you're walking back and forth. And you start off pretty quickly. So what you can feel is your feet touching the ground, like touch, 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 touch. Then you slow down somewhat. So you can feel your leg going up and going down. You feel heaviness, lightness, tightness, all kinds of different sensations. And then for the third part, you slow down really a lot. And you slowly lift your leg up and move it forward, place it down, shift your weight. And somebody always says, it looks like Night of the Living Dead, and it's just very characteristic of that school. So one year, Jack Cornfield brought Ajahn Chah, who was his main teacher, from the Thai forest tradition to IMS to teach. And we had all these meditators already here who were doing that kind of slow, creepy walk, across the lawn, the front lawn in the Burmese style. And Ajahn Chah would go up to them with his translator and say, "I'm so sorry you're so ill. You can't walk like a normal person. So sad, so sad. May you recover soon, So he was, it's more like a natural mindfulness, and very much that school.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. It has it's more, natural mindfulness and paying attention to the details themselves, and at whatever level you're paying attention, but you're just this constant coming back to paying attention. And so what Philip Moffitt did was took that natural awareness, natural mindfulness, and pointed it towards consciousness on these different dimensions. The physical dimension, the aliveness or your vital energetic dimension, or your emotional dimensions. And you're beginning to pay attention to the objects that come in and out of that. And so that practice, for me, I think of it as it widened my ability to pay attention. And so I have ADD. I've always had this attention deficit disorder, which is kind of strange. When I was young, we didn't even use that word. I couldn't sit still. I couldn't pay attention. That's what it was when I grew up. But now I've been diagnosed and I have a little bit more understanding of it. But a wider view and noticing the movement that's happening in that wider view, I begin to realize was way more stabilizing than the narrower view trying to notice what's happening. So the wider view is what makes the practice work for me. And I really enjoy it. So
there's also, there's so many styles and so many methods, and it's worth exploring. And some things may fit a certain phase of your life and not so much later, or,
right.
Maybe different than what all your friends are doing, but it doesn't matter, because it works for you. And Jack Kornfield's first book was called Living Buddhist Masters. And then they changed the title to Living Dharma or something like that. And it was really interesting because it was all within Theravada or Southern schools of Buddhism, but showed some of the many very different styles that exist, even just within that one school. And they're very, very different, and they're all interesting.
And I'm glad you asked me, what method do I practice with now? Because I haven't always, though I did do Mahasi style for a long, long time. And I also did concentration and all kinds of different ways. And I've just settled over the years into this style that it is now. But you're right. This could be the style that I'm in now. And then a few years from now, completely change. It's keeping that practice alive and interesting, and something that keeps you interested in learning. You never really want to stop learning, being interested in the Buddhist teachings.
So maybe my last question to you actually is, do you have a favorite Dharma quote or teaching nugget? It's hard. It sounds like you have a very broad connection to tell you mine, actually. Well, you think, is really when the Buddha said, hatred will never cease by hatred. Hatred will only cease by love. This is an eternal law. And I used to think that was really quirky, because here's the Buddha, who I always thought of as like Mr. Impermanence, saying this is an eternal law. That's weird. But hatred will never cease by hatred. Hatred will only cease by love. This is an eternal law.
Yeah, I don't have it quite as quoted that, but I think the thing that's my most favorite thing that the Buddha did was when he told his son, who was only 7 at the time, that, when you do anything, whether you think it, you speak it, or you act it, think, act, or speak, that you remember to consider before you do anything, is this going to be skillful? Is this going to be harmful? And then during whatever you're thinking, you're speaking, your actions, consider, is this going to be reflect upon? Is this going to be harmful? Is this skillful? Right? And then after. And I remember the first time I read that, I know what a 7-year-old is like. And I thought that was the harshest thing that any parent could ever say to their child, because it's just going to create a mess, right? They're never going to get it right. And then I began to contemplate on this, and I realized that the Buddha did something that I wish my parents had done. What he actually was saying was reflect. He didn't say you have to do it right. He said just reflect. And he put looking back on what you did in the same category as not doing it in the first place. So he didn't differentiate and say, try to make sure you don't ever do anything wrong. He just said, reflect on your conduct looking back. And something about this idea that you reflect on conduct, that you look afterwards. And he also told him to repeatedly do this. This constant repeated practice is the first time I realized that there's no mistakes in this practice. There's no getting it wrong. There's no messing up. It's just practice. That's it. And no matter what happens, you learn before you do it, and you catch yourself sometimes. You learn in the middle. You're like, this doesn't feel right. I'll catch myself sometimes. Or sometimes I don't even catch it until after it's done. And I look back on it and say, oh, I see how that was. And we'll try not to do that again. But something about having permission at any point in my experience to come in alignment with just my practice, that is what sticks with me all the time, that I never have to feel guilty about whether I did it right or wrong. There's no doing it right or wrong. It's always this kind of inner training. That's what I appreciate.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This has been as inspiring as I knew it would be. So I'm so happy that it happened.
Yeah, I feel inspired.
Look at all those happy faces up there. That's so cute.
And I feel inspired too. Great. Well, it was good to see some of you faces that I remember and I've seen before and I haven't seen in a while. So it's really nice. Yes, I know, Debbie, I miss you too. So it's great. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciated it.
Thank you. I want to know if those people in Ireland and England are still awake.
I appreciate it. I hope I inspired them to stay awake.
I'm sure you did.
Great. Good. Well, thank you so much, Sharon, again for
thank you.
inviting me here. I'm just so happy, so thrilled.
Hey folks, thanks so much for your listening. If you'd like to learn more about Tuere's work, you can visit her website. That's tueresala.org. TUERESALA.org. This Fireside Chat was originally recorded as part of an IMS Online offering. And to learn more about their various programs, you can head over to dharma.org. That's DHARMA.org. And for all things Sharon, including her recent audiobook releases this year of Loving Kindness and Finding Your Way, you can head over to SharonSalzberg.com. This has been the Metta Hour podcast, brought to you by the Be Here Now Network. May you be safe, may you be happy, may you be healthy, and may you live with ease.